Hello, welcome to Basic Deck Building with me, Kolos, and 9moon.gg, a guide, part of a larger series of guides that should give new players, or even veterans alike, a bit of insights into the game of Duelist. So what I'm going to do in this guide is going to try to set some guidelines that the newest of players can follow to make their first and the most basic of decks. And these guidelines, a lot of reasoning goes into exactly why the numbers are chosen for each category and why the deck is shaped the way it's shaped. But I'll get into them later in the later videos in much more detail. The guidelines is the way it is because of three fundamentals of Duelist. And the first fundamentals is that you have to play a lot of 2-drops. Since Duelist has 3 mana orbs on the map that either player can take to curve out larger minions earlier, there's no choice but to play 2-drops and to contest, take at least some of them. Usually, if you miss a 2-drop, it's instant loss. It's game over. So the most important card, the most important aspect of your entire deck is 2-drops, because without 2-drops, your game cannot start. You'll just lose right when you draw your opening hand. The second fundamental aspect of Duelist is that the games are very fast. Most games are decided by the 5 mana turn. If you're a faster deck, by 5 mana, you're either super ahead on board and your opponent is approaching death, or if you're a slower deck, you're even on board and you win because you're slower and you have better minions late game. Another fundamental aspect of Duelist is that the hand size constantly falls, and this is because Duelist is the most tempo-orientated card game of any card game out there possible. And every single turn you have to do something, or you'll just lose. You'll just fall behind. There's very weak comeback mechanics, right? And since you're doing something every single turn, that costs you at least 1 card. Anytime you play more than 1 card a turn, your hand size goes down by 1. And because of the replace mechanics, the lower your hand size, the weaker your future plays, because you'll have less room in your hand to hold on to your future turns. Curve out at least your first and second turn, so you don't want your hand to fall immediately. Playing some decks do have draw cards, but playing them causes a tempo loss, and any card that can win by hand size, by hand advantage, is usually a slower-ish deck because it's much easier to just burst your opponent down, since healing is weak in Duelist for most factions. So combining all these facts together, if you follow the guidelines in this guide, you should have a deck that curves out early and gives you a strong enough start, and that will allow you to do whatever you want later on in the game. Whether you want to finish the game by playing stronger minion, or finish the game with out-of-hand damage in a faster deck. Starting off with 2-drops, the part of your deck that will take up the most rooms. Now, for 2-drops, I suggest at least 9 2-drops. When you add any card to your deck, I suggest you add in increments of 3, which is the maximum allowed of the card you're allowed to have in your deck. And that is because of the replace mechanics. With the replace mechanics, you want the least amount of unique cards possible, because when you replace a card, you cannot get the same card back. So having a smaller pool of unique cards gives you a higher percentage of chance of getting a card the exact card that you want. So any card that you want to add into your deck, would it be 3 copies that you want to add 3 copies, or you want to add no copies? The few exceptions is tech cards. So, but I'll get into replace later, and it's maybe in its own video. So for 2-drop, I suggest at least 9, and this is because you can calculate the percentage chance of having a 2-drop in the very first turn. You're able to roughly model it with this. So this is just a rough model. This doesn't account for the unique replace mechanic, and this assumes that every card in the deck is a unique card. But the difference is very marginal. So, but as you can see, this looks like a natural graph. So what you want to notice is that the marginal benefit as you add more and more 2-drops is less and less. So when you have 0 2-drops, obviously a chance of having a turn 1 play is 0. And when you have your entire deck is 2-drop, it's almost virtually 100. The cutoff point is at 9, because at 9 2-drops in your deck, that's approximately 90% chance of having a turn 1 play. And since we want to go in increments of 3, when you only have 6 2-drops, your chance of having an opening play is only a little bit higher than 75%. But when you want to go to 12 2-drops, adding another 3 sets, then your chance of having a turn 1 play goes up to 95 to 94, 94 to 95. So the inclusion of the third unique 2-drop gives you the largest jump in opening chance for card cost. And here's roughly the tier list as it stands on this patch, subject to future change. So tier 1, the best 2-drop in the game, neutral 2-drop in the game, is Healing Mystic. After that, Azure Herald, Primus Fist. Azure Herald for slower decks, Primus Fist for faster decks. And then after that, Jackslide and Shield Puppy also see some plays, but they're much less common. So I'm going to build along a deck along this guide just to show an example. So let's see. Let's start with the Argeon deck, because Argeon is the easiest general for beginners. So what we want is 9 2-drops. That's right, Herald. I said this is a good card. Healing Mystic and Primus Fist. Oh. Moving on. Now we're at the 4-drop slot. Now you might notice we skipped from 2-drop straight to 4-drop. That is because it's actually unnecessary in Duelyst to curve out to a 3-mana card, because player 2 starts at 3 mana, and player 1 starts at 2 mana, but has the option of walking onto mana tile to get another mana on the second turn. So both player 1 and player 2 can play a 4-drop minion on curve very reliably in Duelyst. So that's why you can completely skip the 3-drop slot. And I'll explain why this is. I'll go into why this is a smart deck building choice in a later video. But the suggestion is that you don't play 3-drop minions at all, unless the 3-drop minion is close enough power to a 4-drop minion that you can practically treat it as a 4-drop minion anyway. But there's not a lot of those OP 3-drops in the game. So for 4-drops, I suggest you have at least 6 4-drop minions. Again, 2 unique minions and 3 copies of each. Now, the common cards in the meta at the moment is Diotis and Sunsteel Defender for aggressive deck, but just in general strong 4-drop minions that can pressure opponents. Or you can play Sworn Sister Elkion as an effective card draw and Spelljammer. Now, the difference between these two is that Spelljammer is played by faster decks because they don't care that their opponents is drawing cards, because in theory you're supposed to play more cards and win. Whereas Sworn Sister Elkion is usually used by slower decks because a slower deck can't afford to play Spelljammer, where all Spelljammer would benefit the opponent far more than it benefits yourself. Moving on, 5-drops. Now, having a 5-drops is actually unnecessary. A few decks, a good proportion of decks, actually do not curve out to 5-drops and just skip straight into late game. You have access to a very cheap basic card that's very effective. Dancing Blade is always a good 5-drop card to have in your deck if you're able to play it early game. Now, this card has an immediate effect. It can swing the board. It has a decent body. It can pressure the opponent, and sometimes not even eat a removal. So this is just a general great card to have if you're a new player. You don't have a lot of good options. Before we do the factional OP, we're going to add the 4 and 5-drops. Right, and now we're going to add some 4-drops. 4. As I've said, Sunsteel Defender, a very decent card, and Diotis. Done. 6 4-drops. Moving on, and now for our 5-drops. Suggested curving out to Dancing Blades, and boom, there we have it. 19 out of 40 cards already picked. That's half the deck. And now we got to the factional OP cards. Now, counterplay games have decided that there will always be the strongest cards. So certain cards in the game are much more powerful than other cards. So much more powerful that you can build your entire deck around it. You can build your entire faction. The entire identity of a faction is based on these cards. For example, Holy Immolation, Spectral Revenant, and Mechanical War Beast. These cards will be seen in almost every single deck of that faction, regardless of what it is, for the most part. In our case, for Lionar, there are quite a few cards in Lionar that are auto-includes in a lot of decks. And here, we're going to go back. We're going to swap out some of the old cards for stronger factional cards. Lionar actually have access to some of the strongest early game minion in the entire game, from Vazrite Lion and Windblade Adept. So adding two drops would allow us to take out 2 neutral 2-drops. So let's get rid of Azurite Herald. Now between Healing Mystic and Primus Fist, I think this is more of a Temple-ish Lionar deck. So Primus Fist is probably better. Primus Fist also synergizes with Azurite Lion pretty well. And moving on into the list, Silverguard Knight, also a pretty OP card, OP. 3 of these. Now this can be treated as a 4-drop, so I can potentially take out one of these 4-drops. And I think I will. I'll take out Sunsteel Defender and keep with Diotis, because Diotis spawns a 0/10 Gravestone that synergizes with the Lionar hero power more. Moving on, Trinity Oath, objectively overpowered card. Sometimes some might even say Ironcliff Guardian, but the current metagame is 50-50 against Ironcliff Guardian. So you know what? I won't even add this card into the deck. But the card that I will definitely not forget to add is Holy Immolation. I need 3 of these. Draw as many of these as possible. And boom, there we have it. Factional OP cards. And moving on. So for the remaining 15 cards, you want to go down this list. You want to have these things, at least some of these things in your deck. Now, in Duelyst, every minion people play is pretty much an answer or die minion. And some minion are answer or die in a fashion that they can be dispelled and they're worthless. So I suggest at least 3 of either a dispel or a hard removal, because they essentially do the same thing. Sometimes you don't want people to be able to somehow curve out a super strong minion and then you can't answer it and you lose immediately. So having 3 is a pretty minimal standard to have. Sunbloom won at least a few copies, so let's go with 2. And that doesn't complete our 3 hard removal, so let's add Pulsar Beast. Lionar doesn't actually have good hard removals. It's one of those factions. So 2 Sunblooms and 2 Repulsor Beasts. That's a good amount of removals. Let's add a few pings. In this situation, let's go with Tempest. 2 Tempest. That's enough. After pings, AoE. So it's pretty much the same thing as pings. In AoE, Lionar actually have Tempest Ready, which is a ping, and an AoE, and we have Holy Immolation, which is probably one of the best AoEs in the game, if not the best. So after that, oh yeah, I forgot about this. Game-ending cards. So we have on curve plays, we have tech cards to deal with your opponent's threat. Well, enough to deal with to give you window of opportunity to finish a game when your opponents play a threat. Now we need cards that will make this deck set this deck apart from other decks, because this deck so far just have generic good stuff. Well, this deck, if you look at the curve, it seems to be very high tempo, very fast mid-range type of deck. So we need cards to end the game and to also give us even more tempo. So in this scenario, let's see, for Tempo Argion, very popular choices is cards like Slow. Slow is let's do 3 of, since we have Trinity Oath, and we are not too worried about our hand size. Slow is good. What else is good? Arclight Sentinel is a played card, but I don't particularly like it. Arclight Regalia is a good card. This card, the more you play of it, the more value it gets, because they block damage, so they prevent themselves from being able to be removed easily. And lastly, probably another game ender that people would use is Saberspine Tiger. And there we have it, a very standard mid-range Lionar type of deck. I'm aware that if you're a new player, you probably have no cards whatsoever. So in that situation, there's 3 things that you can do. And you also in, I don't know, bronze. And the three things you can do is one, play golems. And because bronze is such a weak elo, bronze all the way to gold, it's such a low rank that if you just play consecutive on-curve minions, it's actually very likely that you win the game straight out. Just with consecutive on-curve minions plus a little bit of removal to deal with a dangerous threat if your opponent ever plays one. And what kind of dangerous threat your opponent might play? Well, that is, of course, ranged. If in earlier elo, most decks does not have good removal. And because they don't have good removal, then maybe they're not even smart enough to remove the ranged threat. You can just play a ranged minion, like Veil Hunter, and maybe your opponent would never deal with it. And if they don't ever deal with it, then you just get to win the game for free. Because any ranged minion staying alive for more than 1 or 2 turns is an instant game one, pretty much. And last but not least, Mechs. Now, Mechs is the cheese strat of Duelyst. And you would think that a cheese strategy would be unreliable and weak and very slow, but that's where you're wrong. See, in Duelyst, it's a complete opposite. Mechs have the best opening in the entire game. Best opening, of course, being Wings of Mechasword plus Helm, or even Wings of Mechasword plus Snow Chaser. Mechs is extremely powerful. This is a complete luck-based deck. If you just remove everything, let's go with the classic thing. You just type in Mech, just click on all these cards. Boom, you have a Mech deck. Now, 5 out of 6 factions has no easy way to deal with mechs, with the exception of crossbow. So if you hit any faction that's not Fey and they don't have crossbows, as long as you play 5 of these cards in the first 3 turns, that's an instant win. Now, to deal with it, and to deal with ranged threat in general, of course, you just run crossbow. And crossbow reads destroy an enemy minion with range. So, yeah, mechs is also a very valid strategy. I'm one of the players with a lot of experience in all aspects of the level, because recently I've done a climb in a single stream from new account to rank S, and I have, I guess, the slowest record if anyone was able to do it. There's only 2 persons that ever be able to accomplish this feat, me and Mazer. And Mazer on his first run did it in 13 hours with aggro vet. And then his second run with Kasiba took something like 15 hours, whereas my run took 16 hours. I did it with Mech Nova Kasiba. So, yeah, what I did was I made a brand new account, and in one stream, in a single stream, I went from new account status, rank 30, to rank S. So I know a lot about what the lower ladder looks like. And that's it. So thanks for watching this guide. I hope you've learned something about basic deck building. If you follow these guidelines, you should be able to get to Diamond at minimum. And I'll make some more videos expanding on deck building content and explaining how to build a top tier deck.